Counterplans. So I guess some of you guys saw counterplans at Novice. So can someone tell me what a counterplan is? Like, what is the point of a counterplan? And whatever you think. Yeah.
It's like a side to the neg, but it's like it's like on the side of the neg, but like it's like instead of doing the app, we don't do either, but we do something else that's related to it, kind of.
Right. So, and it doesn't even have to be related. It's just there is another thing you can do instead of the app. And so, what's the purpose of that? So, I'm gonna do one of those things. We do it like debate camp. It's kind of, I think it's a little bit like silly, but it does kind of help the foundations of it. So, like, let's imagine a plan, like a plan that is eat a cookie. Okay. So, the plan instead of app is eat a cookie. That's the resolution. Right? Let's say their logic is I'm hungry. That's hurting my stomach. A cookie will help fix that. What can you say is next?
Diabetes.
Diabetes. Perfect. So it is unhealthy, right? I'm not even there. So the disad, right? So there's different kinds of neg arguments. We've mainly gone over the disadvantage, right? Which is where you say uniqueness, malink, impact, right? What is bad about that specific action? Okay, so let's say the disad is unhealthy, right? It's not going to single-handedly cause diabetes, but it'll be unhealthy. Right, we all following so far? Mm-hmm. Okay. Unhealthy. But if you are starving, this doesn't really matter that much. It's kind of bad, but it's not that bad. Like, let's say this is how good fulfilling your hunger is, and this is how bad the unhealthiness is, right? This will outweigh, right? If I'm hungry, my stomach is really hurting, or I want to eat something. So in a debate where the neg is only allowed to use disadvantages, oftentimes the aff just outweighs on principle. So what do? But in real life, that's not how it works, right? There are reasons we don't want to eat something because it's unhealthy, even if you're really hungry. So let's say like your mom is like, oh, don't eat that cookie, it's unhealthy. What else might she say?
Eat an apple.
Eat an apple instead, right? Mm-hmm. Now that changes everything, because now you're solving the harm of being hungry while also avoiding disadvantage, and then clearly that shows why eating a cookie is bad. Just looking at the positive and negative impacts of one action might not be enough for you to say, is that action something we want to do? And actually, that's only part of the equation. So there's kind of two general approaches to counterplans. One is like the apple thing, right? The app has a harm, and they have a solvency. You have a different kind of solvency for the same harm. So you are doing the same good as the app, but you're also avoiding a bad, right? So, and the other thing is, like I was saying, opportunity cost. The other action might just be a good action, and doing the app is preventing you from doing that action. So that could be like, let's say I want to go to the store to buy some bread, but also, like, my grandma is like getting kidnapped.
Oh,
okay.
I thought you were saying about to die.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think this makes more sense this way.
Yeah.
They're about to get kidnapped. So the grandma getting kidnapped is not a reason why going to the store is bad, but it is an opportunity cost that I'm giving up when I want to go to the store. So if I say going to the store by itself is a good action, but saving my grandma is what I'm foregoing if I go to the store, and that matters more. But that's not related at all to going to the store. So now we're not talking about the same harm. Let's say the harm is like I don't have bread and I want to get bread. So I'm completely ditching that original harm. I'm not saying, oh, this is a better way of solving that harm that avoids some disadvantage. I'm just saying this is a better action straight up, but it's mutually exclusive with doing the act. Right? That sort of makes sense? Okay. So those are the two main categories of counterplans. So let's talk about the actual topic, right? So living wage. What are some counterplans you guys saw? Did anyone see one?
Insurance. Instead of increasing like the actual money, increase insurance policies.
Okay, so the app is living wage, and that's okay. So which category of counterplan does that sort of fall into? Solving the same harms or solving a different harm? So let's think of what the warrants for the app were. Like, the app is basically just saying poverty now that causes suffering, right?
Yeah.
And then the app solves it. So like living wage solves. But if you're neg or counterplan, and they're just abbreviated to CP, don't be weird. Okay, it's saying like insurance. What harm is the insurance trying to solve? Right. So we are solving the same impact. We're also solving suffering, and we're avoiding disadvantage, which is people not spending their wages properly. kind of a reductive argument. I feel like that's quite a bad rhetoric to be saying, just like poor people are just going to waste your money. But still, if we buy that argument, and sure, I mean, every argument deserves to be heard, then the argument follows as we solve the harm of their suffering through giving them insurance, but we avoid the disadvantage, which is them spending their money. Like, that. And so that's the kind of counterplan. And so here's the official name for that kind of counterplan. It's called an advantage counterplan.
So, what if like insurance was one of your contentions? What would be like the difference between a contention and a counterplan?
The only difference between a counterplan and a contention is, well, contention is a broad argument. Contention is literally synonymous with the word argument. Like a contention means argument. But if we're talking about disadvantages as that kind of contention, the difference is disadvantages are defending the status quo. Disadvantages are saying this is something bad about that action. Counterplans are saying here is a different action. When you're defending a counterplan, you're actually taking a different action, such as giving them like healthcare, giving them insurance. If you don't have a counterplan, you're by default defending the status quo, otherwise the world we live in today. So every argument is on the negative saying why the app is bad, but this is saying it's bad because we should be doing this instead. So advantage counterplans solve the harms of the app. They solve the same harms, but avoid disadvantage. This is the most common kind of counterplan. And the reason for that is because if I'm the government and I'm saying, should I go to the store or save my grandma, I can just dispatch different people to do different things. So it's not as much of that situation doesn't really come up as often. I'll go ahead and tell you what it's called though. It's called a uniqueness counterplan. That's what it is when you have a separate impact that you're saying kind of trades off with doing the app. Okay, but this is way more common. Anyways, so another common-ish kind of counterplan, and this is when you start to get into questionable counterplans, is what we call the PIC. Does someone who did debate before remember what a PIC is? PIC stands for Plan Inclusive Counterplan. PIC. And so the idea behind a PIC is that instead of a completely different action, I'm just going to change the plan a little bit and be like, that's better than the plan, so we shouldn't do the plan, we should do this instead. So let's put it in context. Let's say the plan is living wage. Right? Plan is living wage. The app says we should give a living wage to all US workers. The PIC could be we should give a living wage to all US workers except people who are known to commit fraud or something. Like who've committed fraud in the past. So what that does, right, is it accesses like 99% of the benefits of the app, but it excludes a small amount of it that might be bad. Maybe if you say giving it to people with fraud means they'll just use it to commit more fraud or something. It's not a good argument, it's a terrible argument actually, but just for the sake of example. Then the PIC would argue that's better than doing the app, therefore the app isn't the best option, so we should vote neg. Last year we had one that was like the US should substantially reduce their military presence from the Middle East. So a lot of plans were like, oh, the whole Middle East. And then I read a PIC at Emory. I read a PIC that was, let's withdraw all our presence except from Saudi Arabia. And because we have like good relations with Saudi Arabia, if we withdrew it, then they would get scared and start building their own nukes. That was an argument. Well, all the app's arguments about how our troops being there are bad, how our troops being there are like racist and hurting people, I still solve all of that because all of their presence in other countries are still being withdrawn. I'm only leaving them in Saudi Arabia. But that's not the app. It's different from the app, and it's better than the app, therefore the app shouldn't be done. Okay, and so when you go about writing a counterplan or identifying a counterplan, there are a few key parts to it, right? The first part is the text. And the text of the counterplan is what it sounds like. It's just the actual words of the counterplan. The US ought to increase the mandatory insurance policies that companies give by like whatever degree they have, or like give them a higher tier of insurance. That's your text. What the actual counterplan itself is saying. So solvency is how it solves the same impact. So that's kind of the meat of it. Like, okay, so here's like what the actual counterplan is. Here is like it solved, like it helps suffering. You got to prove that it actually does solve the app first. Your net benefit. So this is like And sometimes your net benefit will be within your counterplan, sometimes it'll be external. So in the insurance one, it doesn't make much sense to just read a whole disad talking about people are gonna misspend their money. So your net benefit will probably be read with the counterplan. But for example, a different counterplan might be like,
You mean the oil?
which one was it? Oh yeah, the banning oil, right? Yeah. Okay, the topic was banning oil extraction on US grounds.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That was the app. And so the net might be like, that causes a huge economic shock that leads to a recession, that leads to extinction. But we can still solve climate change by doing like carbon pricing, which is like a carbon tax or something. And so in that case, your net benefit doesn't have to be within the counterplan. You can just read a disad that says, like an econ disad, and then separately have your counterplan that avoids the econ disad. And that way, if they counter your counterplan, you can just go for the disad by itself also. Does that make sense? And then you have your competition. And this is why you can't do both. So, for example, in the grandma situation, you are physically prevented from being able to go to the store and help your grandma. But in the case of the government, if I said like we should have a living wage and the insurance counterplan, and you talk about why insurance guarantees that these people stop suffering. What is the answer that you say?
Wait,
Perm do both.
Perm do both, yeah, sorry.
Perm do both. So let's talk about that. When you have the living wage app
Did you?
and you have the insurance
Someone said
counterplan, this thing guarantees that they're helped. But you could do both. You could have the US government pass a legislation giving everyone a living wage, and they could still pass legislation giving everyone better insurance. Then you get all the benefits of this and all the benefits of that. And so therefore the counterplan isn't a reason to reject the app. If you just prove that I have a better policy than your policy, that doesn't mean you reject that first policy, right? A lot of counterplans suffer from this issue. They're like, oh, our policy is so much better than your policy, but they don't prove that the first policy can't be done. Like if I have a benefit, there are other benefits of living wage besides insurance, right? We talked about things like workers will be more inspired to be productive, all that stuff.
Like increase consumerism, so the economy
Yeah. It boosts the economy, right? They spend more.
Yeah, we said
Right.
that block.
put
Well,
in the
yeah.
economy.
Because with insurance, they don't actually have more pocket money to spend, so there's no economic stimulation. So why don't you do both? You help the economy and you guarantee they get health care, right? So that's your first answer to almost every counterplan is what we call the permutation. Any questions? Anything? Gaps?
So you would still have like your card and like you would just explain, but it would just be in the counterplan. Like all your evidence would just.
A counterplan would be like another contention.
Okay.
But you would just be counterplan, you'd have to have the text. The text doesn't have to have a card for it. The text can just be like the same way you write the resolution out. And then you want to defend your points with cards.
Wait, so you just separate counterplan. Is that by itself a contention? Or?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So responding to them, because I think we can talk more in depth about how you build one when you pick one that you want to build, and we can you can show me your file. We'll go over what are you missing, what do you need. But everyone needs to know how to respond to one because you're gonna hate them, right? So responding to counterplans. But I feel like no, plots is better, right?
Yeah.
Plots just sounds better. Okay, let's do plots.
If I heard splot.
Wow.
Okay, responding to counterplans. Okay, plots. P is permutation, and I'll get into what the functions of them are. L is links to the net benefit. O is offense. T is theory. And S is solvency deficit. It looks like a lot of words, but when I explain each one, it shouldn't be that hard to remember. Plus, we have plots down. Okay, so permutations, right? We briefly discussed what perm do both is. So it's only one type of permutation. There are others. So permutation just means you can do the AF and something else. You can do the AF and the counterplan, and it still works. Therefore, the counterplan is not a reason to reject the AF. Perm. Right, and you want to explain. I'll explain why. So most of the time, you want to phrase it like with a full sentence of explanation. You can say perm do both shields the link to the disad. What that means is the disad has a link, right? The disad says, okay, like let's say that the econ disad on the living wage topic says giving people living wages would hurt like small businesses, and that's bad because small businesses, are core to the economy would go into recession, we'd all die. And the counter plan is we should give tax exemptions to small businesses because that allows them to pay their employees more. Perm do both, which shield the link to disad. Because if you give them tax exemptions and force them to pay the living wage, well, they're still not going to trigger that disadvantage because you have shielded it by doing both of them. When you give them a tax exemption, now there is no longer a link because you've already solved that problem. You've solved the problem of small business being vulnerable, so it is okay to do the AF. Okay, but the general premise is just perm do both means you can do both of them. Just because you have this other good action doesn't make AF bad action. That's the premise of it. The other kind of common perm is perm do the counterplan. And that just means the counterplan is so similar to the AF that if you were to do the counterplan, it would basically just be doing the AF. So this is when people run really crazy picks where they say just do it for everyone except this small group, or do it for every, have this policy that affects every nation except this one nation. And your AF didn't really specify a plan. Your AF was just, I define the resolution, or something general. Then you could be okay, that counterplan is literally an example of what the AF could look like. Therefore, if you buy the counterplan, you vote AF. That's perm to the counterplan. Right, so that makes sense? Okay. Those are the most common perms. There are other perms, and you can make up any perm you want to make. You can say perm, do the AF, and then do the counterplan afterwards. Solvency deficit. That is a general argument. It exists in a lot of different contexts, but basically the counterplan doesn't solve what it intends to solve. The exact example is the insurance example. If we have an econ advantage of how more pocket money causes more spending, which boosts the economy, and there is the insurance counterplan, it doesn't solve that at all. So if I say boosting the economy, our economy is approaching recession, we have to do the AF to avoid recession because it boosts people's pocket money, and they say, no, we should do insurance instead because it still solves suffering. It doesn't solve all of your AF. You still have an extinction scenario that the counterplan doesn't solve. So counterplan is a gaping hole in its solvency, or a solvency deficit. Every time you have an AF, obviously you're going to be making your contentions based on the AF action. So the AF action is probably going to be the best way of solving those issues. Anytime you just think of some other way of solving those issues, it's probably not going to be as good as the AF. Right? Last year, September, October was the right to housing was the AF. And the most normal contention for that is that, okay, we should give people the right to housing because homeless people are suffering. And a counterplan people ran was the UBI, or minimum wages or something, boosting people's wages. How about, and they were instead of having the right to housing, we should just give people more wages. Because if we give people more wages, they can not only buy a house, but they can spend it flexibly, which is better for them. Okay. So huge solvency deficit. Why are people not able to afford houses now? Because of inflation, because the housing market is bad. If you give them more money, houses aren't going to magically appear. Just because they have more money doesn't mean they're going to get a house. Let's say I'm reading a different contention. My first contention is racism. People can't get houses because of racial racism that's stopping them, landlords being racist. Second is the housing crisis is caused by landlords buying up houses and renting them at high prices. So no matter how much money you have, you'll always be priced out by someone with more money. And those are my contention. The pocket money, the increasing wages, doesn't solve any of that, right? It doesn't actually ensure that people get more houses. Therefore, it has a huge solvency deficit. Okay, cool. Those are the most important ones that you can pretty much always read at least one of those, if not both. But there are other ones. Links to the net benefit. So the net benefit, if we remember, is the reason why the counterplan is better than the plan. So, for example, the insurance thing, and let's say they read the econ disad and they read the insurance counterplan. It costs too much money to give everybody more wages. Let's give them the insurance thing instead, because that also helps their suffering, but it doesn't hurt the economy as much. This says, yes, it does. If you are giving them insurance boosts, that means you're spending more money on them, so it's still going to cause a recession. It's still going to If you're forcing small businesses to give them twice as much premiums on their insurance, you're still forcing them to pay higher, like more money effectively, which still hurts these small businesses that you claim are on like the brink of dying out, which is still going to cause the exact same recession and have the exact same impact. So your counterplan doesn't solve your own net benefit; it links to your own net benefit. Or like, let's say the elections decide. Y'all remember what that was? If you do the AF, it causes the other candidate to win, and that's bad. Like Harris is on the way to winning now. The AF is super liberal, causes conservative voters to get mad. And that causes Trump to get elected, which causes structural violence or causes foreign relation issues that cause extinction. That's what they said, and you say, okay, that's why instead of doing the living wage, we should do the insurance counterplan. Well, guess what? It's just as liberal of a policy if you want everybody to be forced to pay higher insurance. It's still forcing businesses to pay more. Therefore, it links to the net benefit. So a lot of the times, counterplans will link to the net benefit, and you got to point that out, because if that's the case, then the counterplan is dead, because it's just as bad as an AF in terms of avoiding that issue, right? Okay, offense. Offense is exactly what it sounds like. A reason why the counterplan is bad. The CP is bad. It's bad. Yes, I know CP is bad.
Counterplans are bad.
But counterplans are bad. But that counterplan is bad. Let's say you know people are going to read the insurance like counterplans. It's going to be pretty common. So you prepare some files. You said, okay, insurance counterplan is bad because insurance companies are just going to raise the prices of their insurance if they know that they're going to be guaranteed to get paid for, which is going to cause small businesses to die out. Right? That's why it's a bad idea. Whereas with the living wage, at least you can monitor what the living wage is. If you just say, okay, you got to pay for better insurance, then it's up to the insurance companies to decide how much you have to pay, which is totally corrupt and can cause issues. That's offense. A reason why this counterplan is just a bad idea at face value, right? And last is theory, right? Theory is related to fairness and sort of the procedural norms we have in debate. I'm not going to get into all of theory now. That's going to take a whole other 2 hours, like a different day. We can talk about what theory is and how to run it and how it works. It's pretty advanced. Most judges here, unfortunately, probably won't even understand it. So,
Yeah, they do.
yeah.
They do.
So, but like, for example, with the pick that I was saying, like, oh, we should withdraw from everywhere except Saudi Arabia, that's kind of unfair. Like, it's just not a fair counterplan to run. So theory would be saying, you know, like, debaters must not include parts of the AF in their counterplan because it's unfair. It steals all our offense, and so we have to boil the whole debate down to like whether or not we think we should withdraw from Saudi Arabia, when we should be talking about whether or not we should withdraw from the Middle East in general. It like makes the debate less educational and less fair, right? So that's what theory is. It's attacking whether or not it's a fair practice. And you can always run like a layified version of theory. You can always just be like, that's unfair. That steals our offense. You know, Charlie Hill beat me by freaking saying that without any warrants because the judges were lay. So he was just up there like yapping about the neg counterplan's unfair and it steals all the offense and it's terrible. And then so theory is always options. Even if you don't have like formal proper theory, you can always say those claims that I just said. Like, okay, if you exclude all of our offense except that tiny amount, the entire debate is going to turn into whether or not we should do that tiny amount instead of the main crux of our like what we're supposed to be clashing about. Therefore, it's a lot less educational, and it puts me in an uphill battle. Therefore, you shouldn't be allowed to do that, right? Like that's what theory is: fairness and education. But again, I'll go into more detail how you actually run theory later. That's the premise of it. Sort of makes sense? Once you have this in your brain and you practiced it a couple times, we'll run some drills on it and stuff. It'll be a lot easier. Counterplans will not be intimidating anymore. They just won't. Plus, most of the time when like a resolution is released, you can kind of sniff out what the main counterplans are going to be. And if you can't, you can go on open case list, look at tournaments, what are people running as counterplans, prep out the main ones. They're going to be, and the people who are running counterplans are probably going to steal from open cases anyway, so you're going to know what the main ones are going to be. Last year we had, last year.
I loved rehabilitation.
That was interesting.
That was so fun.
So last year, the resolution was that the U.S. like prisons ought to be rehabilitated. It was like the primary objective ought to be rehabilitation. The primary objective of the U.S. prisons have to be rehabilitation, right? We know what that means. Rehabilitation, like focusing on making people get better, being nice, not being punitive, not being punished.
So much.
Right? That was the app. And there was a counterplan, which
I
was a
love
pick.
being nice.
Actually, I should have waited and asked what that would be.
Oh, sex offender?
The sex offender pick, which is that we should be rehabilitated to everybody except sex offenders. because they're known to like just like game the system and get out there and start like sex offending.
Oh nah.
So
That is true, I mean.
yeah. So
I knew someone was gonna say that.
exactly. Should Diddy be treated with rehabilitative care or should he be punished? Well, in the
Punished.
Exactly, he should be punished. And that's what made the pick very
Bro cannot be
effective.
rehabilitated.
Exactly. Can you he has 3,200 cases against him.
Yeah, I
That's
know.
like a full-time job touching kids. Like, can you rehabilitate that guy? I don't think so.
No, he's allowed to.
Okay, six counterplan. So this is the fourth counterplan. I didn't really talk about it the first time because I thought we wouldn't have to worry about it, but might as well because we're going to talk about it now. So, agent or actor counterplans are where you change who is doing the resolution. So it's basically, instead of the U.S. federal government doing it, the 50 states of the U.S. should individually make the law in their own respective states. I just went on straight just on the open case list, right? All right, here's counterplan. Here's the text, so I'm just gonna write it for. The 50 states and all relevant territories should require that workers should receive a living wage. So this is called the 50 states counterplan, right? So it's an actor counterplan. The action stays the same, the actor changes. Some people describe it as a pick out of the actor, right? So whenever you hit one of these, one of your responses should be that it's unfair. But you gotta have more than that, because if they defend that, you're cooked, if that's the only response you have.
What was the difference between the text and the counterplan and the actual resolution?
Here it is. The 50 states and all relevant territories should require that workers receive a living wage, instead of the U.S. federal government should require that workers receive a living wage. So it's an actor counterplan. He is saying that instead of a bill being passed in Congress and everybody has a living wage now, every single individual state should pass a law saying that within that state they should have a living wage. Because this is one that threatens to solve literally all of the app. Look at the different components that they're using. First they start with their text, then they move on to their solvency. State action solves and results in a federal follow-on. I'm not going to go into federal follow-on right now, but it just means, like, when the states do it, eventually the federal government will follow. We have a card that establishes competition, saying United States refers to the federal government. Right, we have the text, right? Those are the four components of the counterplan, right? Your text, your solvency, something else, which I'm going to ask you, and your competition, right? So you have your text, which is the 50 states should do living wage. You have your solvency, which is this card talking about how if the 50 states individually did it, states provide for a range of minimums instead of the federal government has one size fit all. And then you have your competition, which is saying United States refers to the federal government, not individual states. So this is kind of a hedge against perm due the counterplan, where they're saying, no, this is definitely not the AF. The AF says United States, and that refers to the federal government. We're talking about individual states and is not the same as the United States. Like, this is different from the AF. This is like a block against perms. That is what competition is. Okay? So you have your text, you have your solvency, you have your competition. What is it missing? The net benefit. You have two actions. If you want to do one instead of the other, it has to have a net benefit, right? It's a term we use in everyday language, right? What's the net benefit of doing this action, right? When you, after all of the pros and cons of whatever, do we have a net benefit, right? But it's not here. I mean, maybe it's like this one size fit all. In fact, he probably wants to trick you into thinking that it's just this thing, like what Maki was pointing out about how like the one size fit all is not as good as a range of minimums, right? Like if you have one living wage for everybody, it's not as good as like the states having it. And he wants to trick you probably into just being like, okay, that's fine, perm do the counterplan. In fact, the AF already accounts for that, right? Or like, yeah. But that is not the net benefit. We have an external net benefit, and that is probably the first convention here. What is this convention? Just from the first card, what do you think is convention?
Criticism.
Right? So what is this? What kind of
election.
What?
An election.
Yeah, this is an elections dissent. From the very first uniqueness card, you can probably tell that, right? But you get the idea, right? Harris is winning, the plan causes Harris to lose, that causes us to all die. That's that. So that is your net benefit. Because why? If the 50 states are doing the plan, then it's not going to be associated with Harris, according to this argument. If the federal government does it, Harris is the one signing that bill, then people are going to blame Harris for it. Trump can be like, look at what Harris did. If the state does it, then what is Trump going to say? I mean, Harris wasn't the one controlling that, right? Therefore, that plan causes this extinction level impact, the counterplan does all the same good the plan does, but it avoids that impact, right? And that's the net benefit. So now we have a completed picture. Our text is, instead of the US doing it, it should be the 50 states. Our solvency is that it's just as good, in fact, it's probably better, because they can like do one size fit all, like it's better than one size fit all. Our competition is that just making sure everybody understands, the US is the federal government, not the states, so we're all sure on that. Like, it's not the same thing as the app. And our net benefit is this whole part up here, the elections to set. Right? Now we have all four parts of the counterplan. How do we respond to this? Are you cooked?
I sure am.
I'm not understanding.
You
Yeah.
never cook.
I'm
You go to
sad.
offense.
You read your app. Let's say your app is the util app. It talks about like having a living wage is good for people who don't have enough money, not enough spending money. The living wage will give them more spending money, and that boosts the economy. Good for everybody. And then you have another contention about a living wage builds trust in the federal government, which helps maintain democracy. That solves extinction. And all right, those are your two contentions to the app. And then the neg gets up and reads this. Let's ignore his other stuff, because it's a lot. Let's just imagine the neg only reads these two things. How do we respond?
Perm to act and counterplan.
Perm to the app, then the counterplan. Okay.
I can see.
From do both.
Or do both, okay.
Yeah, affirmative.
US can test living wage at national level and then states can modify it.
So the success of the living wage will help Harris, they said.
Okay, awesome. So that is a lot. So what what are our different things? Well, let's hit up one of each one. So let's get what's the acronym? Someone that didn't do it last year.
Well,
Plots?
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
plots.
Thinking of squat.
I said squat.
He said you could also use splot.
Yeah, if you want to have the S first, because the S is important. But I feel like plots just sounds better in my head. Like,
Yeah.
plot? That's weird. But okay, what is P?
Permutation.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is L?
Links
Oh,
in
yeah,
numbers.
link 10G.
Yes. Link.
Oh. Never.
Yeah. If nobody knows it, then people who have done it before can say it. So let's try to get people who haven't done it.
Offense.
Well, scholar here.
I forgot.
Okay.
I forgot.
Theory. Theory. Yes.
I know this stuff.
Yeah. Good. And
Solvency.
Solvency.
Deficit.
solvency deficit. Awesome. Okay. Okay. And we're talking about the 50 states CP. This is a and you can imagine this is a pretty generic counterplan. Any given resolution that has to do with the U.S. probably you're able to make this counterplan, right? I had this counterplan on the rehabilitation topic. I mean, I ran it on the topic. On the housing topic, I also ran it on the topic. I like this counterplan. But but like you can say you read it on different topics, right? It's a generic. So you should be able to, if someone reads something on you, boom, 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 like you know what to say to respond to it. So let's go over it. What should we say for P?
Perm do both.
Okay, perm do both. Perm.
I really like perm do after.
Okay, perm do after then the next?
Mhm.
Sure. And you can just spam perms, because perms don't take a long time to read, so if you want to read like 5 different perms, just like screw them over, sure. Perm do af, then next. But be aware, if you just say this, that's not enough. Like these are the arguments you want to make, you have to explain each one. So let's go back to perm do both. Maybe since you brought it up, explain why perm do both solves. Like why does that mean that you're winning? Shields the link. Perm do both shields the link. What does that mean here?
You're defending your own link.
Yeah, it shows the disads link. What is the disads here? What is the disad? The net benefit disad. That,
What makes the counter?
that's going with this. What is the net benefit that they're reading alongside the 50 states counterplan? Elections. They're reading the elections disad. So what is the link in the elections disad? Yeah, the moderate voters, right? It'll make the moderate voters be like, oh, Harris is too socialist, right? Awesome. So that's the link. So now you're protecting the link. So you gotta explain. Here's what I would say in the speech. Perm do both, it shields a link to the elections disad because the states doing it alongside the federal government means it's not associated with Harris. If they both do it together, it looks like cooperative federalism. It looks like they're working together. So people actually like Harris more. Okay, And obviously, the intrinsic argument here is that just because that's a good action doesn't mean you can't do the act. So if you win the perm, the counterplan is dead, right? If you win this argument, then no matter how good the counterplan is, if you can do both, then the act is still a good idea as well. Right? Okay. Perm to the act and the neg. Like the federal government can sort of put some like basic level of this as a testing ground, and then and then the states can kind of adopt it. But I hesitate with this one because it doesn't really show the link. Like, yes, this could work, and you can say it for sure, so it doesn't cost you much time. But I feel like it's pretty easy to dismantle this one because your link is that people see living wages as too socialist. If the federal government implements a testing living wages, first of all, it's not really the AF. The AF isn't a testing living wages, the AF is actual living wages. So you're kind of backtracking on what the AF is. Second of all, it still links the elections as that, right? Because they'll be like, the perm links to the dissent. If you don't say it shows something, it's hard for this machine. Okay, what's the other perm? The one that's not like easements that could work in this case. Perm do the counterplan, right? Did y'all remember that competition card I was talking about, where they read a card that said that United States means the federal government, not the individual states, right? That was the second card in there. That is a hedge against this. That's kind of protecting them against this, because you're going to be like, the 50 states is the U.S. government. They're like, no, we have a card saying it's not. But always read this. And in your block files, you probably want a card saying the opposite. I have a card in my block files right now that says the U.S. federal government means the 50 states. I'll read that with this perm, and then we get into a discussion of who's right. If I win this, I also win pretty much the whole debate, unless they drop the counterplan, right? Because if I win the counterplan is the F, then their counterplan means you go for F. Awesome. Always read this, right? Basically, the counterplan is that. This needs a lot less. You don't have to talk about no shielding the link or anything with the counterplan, because your argument is simply the counterplan is good, but it's literally the F. Everyone understand? So sure, in my 1AR, I'm hitting them with on the 50 states counterplan, perm to both, it shields the link, blah blah blah, perm to the F and the neg, perm to the counterplan, right? I'm hitting them with perms. All right. What is the next thing? We might have like
We have
a
next
next
thing.
I think it was a holiday.
Yeah.
We have Columbus Day, or Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we're in Alabama. You know Alabama still calls it Columbus Day, right?
Yeah.
It's not on my calendar.
It's just people that.
Oh boy.
Not the putting slash.
Okay, so perms, check. We got the perms. Let's go. Link down B. Net benefit. What is the net benefit? Yes, election dissent. Right, so net benefit is the election dissent. So I wouldn't, when I say in brown, I'm not going to say link to NB, I'm going to say link to election dissent. Right, be specific. The counterplan links to their own elections dissent. How? Here's what I'd say. Voters don't know every single aspect of politics. If they see that laws are being passed that are making people have living wages and hurting businesses, they're not going to like that. They're going to think the government is being too liberal, and they're going to vote for Trump. It doesn't matter if the states are doing it or the federal government is doing it. If the government is being too liberal and the moderate voters see that, have a knee-jerk reaction to that, they're going to react to that by voting for Trump. The mere thought of socialism would alienate them. The mere thought of socialism would alienate them. If you have all 50 states simultaneously passing a bill that's forcing small businesses to pay up, that's a mere thought of socialism. That's going to alienate the voters. That's going to cause the same dissent, right? Therefore, the counterplan doesn't avoid anything. It has the same issues as the F, so it's not a good thing, right? Link to the benefit. Everyone get that? All right, let's speak to the next one. Offense. Maybe you'd be like, okay, 50 state unanimous action is seen as like, it's never worked in the past, it always fails. People see it as like corruption or someone pulling the strings, blah, 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 whatever. Some reason why 50 states doing that was bad. All right. Theory. What are some theoretical arguments you can make here? And they don't have to be formal, just like, why is this possibly unfair and uneducational?
You're doing the same thing as me. You're just
Right.
changing the person.
You're stealing all of the AF ground and just changing who's doing it. That leaves no room for us to debate anything. We have to talk about whether the 50 states or the federal government is better, rather than talking about the topic. Also, it's unfair because I have to defend the topic, but you can just cut the exact same elections dissent for every single topic and just have the 50 states counterplan and have like pages and pages of block files, because you don't have to worry about the topic anymore. All you have to do is change one card, right? Because this is generic. It's not fair. And it's not educational. We spend the entire hour talking about whether the federal government should do it or whether the state should do it, rather than whether this should be a thing at all. uneducational, unfair. Right? Okay. And then solvency deficit. So that's done. That's done. Solvency deficit. The F is living wage is good because one, it boosts the economy, two, it builds trust in the federal government. And the neg says 50 states. Okay, so we can talk about the first contention first. There's a very generic solvency deficit on every 50 states counterplan, which is that 50 states just cannot cooperate as well as one unified organization by the federal government. If you go, let's say I move from one state to the other, I moved from Alabama to Mississippi. I have to reconfigure with Mississippi's system instead of Alabama's system, it means I might not even be getting paid, I might get exploited. There's a huge solvency deficit there. The other solvency deficit, what is it?
If I could say it. Okay. Your second contention is about restoring, like, the people would have more trust in the federal government. If we do the 50 states, the people aren't going to trust the federal government, and so you're not actually solving for everything that the AF advocates for.
Right.
Yeah.
Distinction.
Stand on that.
Right. The second contention by the F is we have to have living wages by the federal government because that'll build trust in the federal government. We need that because we're losing our grip on democracy and we're going extinct. If we do the 50 states, we're not building any trust in the federal government because the federal government is not the one doing it. Therefore, it's a massive gaping solvency deficit in the counterplan. Make sense? Questions? What questions do we have? I know there's gotta be some questions.
Wait, Rik. So if we argue all these things about the neg, and if the neg just drops the counterplan, then what can we do about it?
Nothing. And you also want to be smart about how long you spend using it. Like maybe read 2 perms, solvency, and a quick theory shell. If they drop it, they drop it. I mean, too bad. Like they dropped it. You got to focus on the rest of it. Focus on the dissad. You should have paper. You should have offense in every single part of it. They're going to collapse into an R no matter what it is. Even if they read 4 dissads, you're gonna have to respond to each one, right? And they might drop 3 of them. It's the same as that. You just have to focus on whichever one they stay on. It's hard, but that's what you gotta do. Okay, that's counterplans, everybody.